Ironically, and people don't know this, a stampede was supposed to be a one-shot phenomenon, just a one-year deal. It was the vision of Guy Weedick, whom I think is probably the most underappreciated person in Stampede history. Weedick, in many ways, is brilliant. He saw, as early as 1909, that this city was ready for a different type of Western experience from the infant rodeo, and more importantly from the very popular Wild West shows, which were very artificial and duplicated Western experiences. Weedick felt that Calgary was ready for a different type of show, a show that duplicated the Western experience more accurately and which celebrated the Canadian Western experience. Now, Weedick was American, and he tried to talk leading businessmen into this in 1909, and he was told that no, this wasn't the time. He was a performer in the Wild West show, and his wife was a very accomplished trick roper, Florence Ledoux, and he was from Rochester, New York, but he was an entrepreneur big time, and he saw that there was more chances to be made promoting it than being an average performer in a Wild West show. And so he was approached, I think he was approached 3 years later by business interests in the city, H.C. McMullen, I think, who asked him to come back and put on his Stampede, as he called it. He came back, and his trouble was wanting to get some money. He didn't have any money. And so he talked to one of the big ranchers, I think it was Burns, and he wanted to know if he'd put money up for this events that you're going to have. And Burns said, let me think about it. I'll get contact with some of my friends. And so Burns was a cattle buyer and rancher. He talked to A.E. Cross, who owned the A7 ranch, and he talked to George Lane of the Bayou. And he tells Weedick that, yeah, we'll put up $25,000 each, which is a lot of money in those days. And apparently he said, he put McLean's name down, and apparently McLean didn't know about it. And Burns said, he'll be in it, don't worry about it. And so those four put up their 25 grand each for this stampede. Their reasons were quite simple. The open range industry was dying. Agriculture was coming in waves. The winter of 06-07 had done dramatic damage to the cattle industry. Argentina had shut out British competition for the British market, and there was no place to go. The lease was tough to get leaseholds. The government wasn't interested in the cattle industry, and these four men believed that the open range industry was dead. The way of life was dead, was gone. And so their reason for putting up this money was to have a final party, a final celebration to a way of life that was gone. As it was, they put up the line of credit. As it was, Weedick didn't need the line of credit, but he had to have it to the assurance to put on the Stampede. He put on a very interesting Stampede, world-class rodeo at the time, and a wonderful parade featuring Canadian pioneers, whiskey traders and mounted policemen and old-time prospectors. And it was a wonderful parade, and he melded them both together very, very well. And it went over very well. And then Weedick went away, and there was an exhibition every year, because the exhibition was the agricultural part, and there was an exhibition going on from 1886, and it was going on. But it went on first of all in fall, and then in the summer. Now the first Stampede was in September. It had nothing to do with the exhibition, which was one that year, nothing to do with it. So the two were. And then in 1919, after the war, they invite Weedick back to put on a victory Stampede. And he does this, the same big four put the money up in 1919, and he puts on a very good show. Again, it was in August. This one was in August, and the exhibition was still in July. Weedy goes away again. And then in between 1921 and 2021-22, the exhibition lost money. It was clear that agricultural type exhibitions were not the sort of thing that people wanted to see anymore. You know, a big city doesn't need this sort of stuff. And the manager of the exhibition, very, very capable man called Ernie Richardson, he gets in contact with Weedy and says, listen, he said, when am I coming back and put your Stampede on again? And put it on this time with the exhibition. Weedy comes back and says, okay, we'll do this. And then he comes out with two ideas that were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He says, right, we should do more than just put on the Stampede with the exhibition. We should involve the whole city. We should get everyone involved. The city fathers were quite pleased with this, and so they dressed up the city. It went western. And this was, you know, hay bales in the streets and mock arrests and arresting the mayor. And then we went western. And the breakfasts were started. And then, probably as an antidote or something to compensate this big-time fixation with auto racing at the time, the new auto racing was coming into being, Weedy says, we need something exciting. And he's settled on the chuck wagon race at the same time. So in 1923, for the first time, you have the exhibition and Stampede coming together. You have the dressing up western. You have the chuck wagon races. And it was very, very successful. And Richardson said to the board of directors that year, we have found something, the city has found something that it needs, and is now up to us to see that it is maintained. And so if you want to know the genesis of the exhibition and Stampede, the exhibition dates till 1886, and they got a grant of land from the federal government, Victoria Park. The exhibition dates to 1886, the Stampede to 1912, the exhibition and Stampede to 1923. And that's so, if say when's the first one, you could say, well, you could say any one of those three dates would be true. Weedy came back every year on contract to put on the Stampede, and it was continued very successfully every year. Amid cutbacks in the early 30s, Weedy ran into some arguments with the Stampede exhibition people over prize money or things like this, and apparently he disgraced himself at the closing ceremonies of one of the Stampedes, early 30s, 32 I think, 33, and they fired him. I think deep down they realised they didn't need him anymore. We can do it. We don't need to pay you your $5,000 every year or $6,000 every year to put a stamp in. We could do it ourselves. But they fired him, and he went after him in court for wrongful dismissal, and he won. He won. But he was persona non grata after that, and they brought him back in the late 40s for a parade and recognised him, and then he wrote columns in the Canadian Cattleman magazine, and the columns he wrote were unbelievable. It showed his unbelievable knowledge of cowboys and traditions in Western Canada and in North America. He died in his early 1950s, and he's buried in High River. I think, you know, Donna Livingstone has written a biography of him, but I think there's far more to be done about Weedy, and I would like to see the Stampede start to put him in the prominent place he deserves. I think he's more important than the Big Four. But they've named a building after him, and the Big Four, the guys, they put the money up. It was never used. But still, I had to have a bit of courage to do it. But I think Weedy should be up there right with them.